I invite the first proposition speaker to start this speech here.
Hi, am I both visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, cool. So verbal PLIs, thanks, he, him pronouns. With that said, my time starts in 3, 2, 1. The most contagious disease in the world is one of the mind. It is an idea that sprouts in one's head and cannot be rooted out. When a lie manifests itself in someone's mind like a parasite, people fundamentally lose the capacity to choose and loses the capacity to pursue their good life. We're so proud to propose. I think the burden for government side is simple. We have to make a comparison between the status quo and this world that people cannot lie, and we have to simply prove why the world where people cannot lie is far better than the contagious world that we live in. The stance is simple. We think that a world without lies has fundamentally plagued the world, that it has made people lose their capacity to choose and to make people be lied to, and they're fundamentally oppressed for this. So we have 3 arguments in this debate, and you'll have an extension later. The first argument is about the principle of human choice and dignity. The second argument is about politicians and the government. The third argument is about advertisements and the integrity of businesses, and the extension will be about the well-being of children. So the first argument we have, before I move on, I have some characterizations. So first, we just like to define what a lie is. Lie is basically anything that is not true. It includes, for example, blatant lies, where it claims that things are simply untrue, right? And secondly, it includes also sugarcoating things, making things seem better as it is. Like, for example, saying that Coca-Cola has basically no sugar, or saying that smoking helps your lungs. Note that you can only lie about facts. People can still have opinions, people can still debate. But secondly, there's an incentive behind every lie. There's probably a malicious incentive, because given that lies are generally things that are used to say detract people from the actual choice. So what does the world look like in our side? I think firstly, people from birth cannot lie, so it's physically impossible for them to say things that are not true, and this is happening for the entirety of history. Secondly, you can probably choose to stay silent when you ask a question. And thirdly, there's just fundamentally no concept of what a lie is in the world. People just assume that when you say something, it is true. And so therefore, I think furthermore, this debate should be about the merits of having a world with lying or not specifically about the models and the technicalities of the counterfactual. Op, therefore, has to stand for the status quo. They have to stand for a world where lies plague the population and millions suffer because of one convenient sentence to oppress the public. The first argument we have is about the principle of human choice and dignity. The premise here is just that that human choice matters. Choice matters because humans fundamentally have the unalienable right to dignity. It is what makes humans distinct from one another, and is what humans distinct from other organisms that don't have the right to choose. And it's another way for them to carry out the pursuit of happiness and to find their good life. So in order to obtain free choice, you need to have access to information so you can have a choice. People usually in scenarios can't judge based on the common sense, because there's a level of technicality and knowledge in order to understand the whole picture. You need some information regarding the candidates so you can actually know who to vote for. Lying actively obstructs the path to obtain that information, because when an outside actor influences you with false information, your views on the options that you can choose from is altered. This structurally obstructs your judgment and your moral compass, because you're influenced to the degree that your free choice is not yours anymore, because a malicious outsider shapes your identity and your lifestyle, because this information is not yours. But this is principally unjustified, and this is extremely important, because there is no autonomy in controlling if someone is lying to you. You can't control and wish to believe, to buy in this lie or not, because the lie is obviously true, and that you assume that you can't actually determine if a lie is true or not, given in like a normal day scenario, because lies are made to be convincing. So therefore, we say that this is principally unjust, because you have no autonomy, and your autonomy over a choice is co-opted by other actors when you're unable to make a free choice, because they make you believe in fake information. The second argument is about politicians and the government. The context here is just that, for example, the Russian government currently operates of a regime of lies, right? It calls for the denazification of Ukraine. It tells that the economy, citizens, that the economy is perfectly fine. A world where people cannot lie resolve this, because the first layer is that lying, we resolve the fact that politicians can lie to the public. Many nationalists are fueled by misinformation. For example, Putin claims that there are Nazis in Ukraine. Also, Trump claims that Obama does not have a birth certificate. Trump claims that immigrants are the main reason of economic downturn and that you're losing your jobs. So therefore, we're just able to root out the fact that they can lie to the public. On our side, misinformation cannot be spread. These people cannot buy into the fake information that these are convenient and is malicious to shape people's intent. Secondly, is that we are able to stop oppression and manipulation, because the most autocratic and corrupt dictatorships lie about the well-being of individuals. They have an authority that can lie about and therefore make people believe that the situation is good and justified while committing the most heinous crimes in the world. For example, the Holocaust happened because Hitler claims that that Jews are the reason why the entire Germany is not Germany before, because it's because of the Jews co-opting their identity. So therefore, we think that the most heinous of crimes would be stopped. The impact is extremely important because there's far less capacity and magnitude and the frequencies for conflicts or just unjust policies for lies for people to believe in. This ought to be weighed over the potential benefits of spreading misinformation, like trying to boost your economy, because we still in the first argument tell you why it degrades the fundamental dignity of citizens. But secondly, developed countries may use it as well. But dictatorships use this to co-opt and press their people to the maximum extent. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Yeah, for autocratic states, they can always conceal those information and not release it to other people anyways. So your mechanism of being able to stay silent kills your own case as well.
No, the comparative. Look at your comparative. You have when your politicians and autocrats are able to lie. We say, for example, hey, God said this because God said it's justified for us to tax you to the maximum, or God said it's justified for you to be neglected, or God said, for example, you're unable to actually get out of the policy cycle because it's your fault. These are all ways that oppressive governments can use by saying that it is justified, but it's actually not the case. You have absolutely no comparative under there. The third argument is about integrity of advertisements and businesses, because businesses have an active incentive to lie to boost their own sales, right? They want to exaggerate ads, they want to downplay health risk in order to prevent people from turning away from most products, and they want to take accountability, for example, environmental damage. So this is extremely bad because people are scammed of their money. There's potential health risks because, for example, when people believe that smoking is not bad for their lungs, right? This is this is bad because there's, like, for example, addiction that people are seldom warned about, and about the chances, and that they have to go to hospitals for. And this gives far more power to the corporations because they can dominate, for example, the social media. They can dominate the societal narrative and therefore make their the most amount of profit when people cannot actually buy into the actual information. There are far more health problems in the comparative of opposition. So therefore, we think that when you fundamentally obstruct principled right to choice, when you fundamentally oppress people and you fundamentally misguide people in advertisement for the companies, the world is far less beneficial when we have a world where we cannot lie, for these reasons proposed.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to continue the case per side opposition, I'd like to invite the first opposition speaker. Here.
Okay, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great, thank you. Verbal POIs, preferably at the 5th minute. Okay, speech starting in 3, 2, 1. If the outcome of people not being able to lie is one where people are actively being harmed or alienated, we prefer a world where lying is an option you can always opt for at the end of the day, right? Before I move on to my arguments today, case setup. Firstly, reading the vote on opposition is simple, right? We support status quo, where lying out of nowhere still is something that's immoral and against social norms, especially towards politicians and powerful, famous figures. But we recognize as a legitimate action and should be given the option to do so if necessary. But also, notice that there is a difference between lying and believing something to be true under both sides of the house, right? When you lie, you actively tell something that goes against the truth or what you as an individual believe to be true. This looks like when you believe in a religion, you obviously think that all the things in the religion is true, and therefore, if you say things like, oh, God is powerful, that God saves you from like sufferings and whatnot, all of these things you believe to be true, and technically, it's not considered a lie in both worlds, right? But second, This also means that if you believe in something that directly makes up part of your identity, no matter how wrong it is, you're not lying, right? That's why war crimes against the Jews, for example, happened not because of a lie, but because Hitler believed it to be true at the very core of his principle as a whole. This directly challenges all the examples that government gave you today. Our stance is then simple. We'd like to concede to the harms and the consequences of lying, like guilt and repercussions, but our burden is simple, so only prove that our world and aspects of self-autonomy and pragmatic benefits were better. But before I move on, yes, you are.
Like, it's obvious for the majority of cases in our world today that politicians don't think that Mexicans are taking our jobs. They know the economic figures. Please deal with the nuance of our case we give you.
Okay, let's move on to the things about politicians, right? I have two responses towards this. It's in terms of the fake information that we want to talk about that politicians imply on people. I firstly think that it's not necessarily the burden of like lying itself to actually solve all of these problems, because cancel culture does exist, and there's a culture of calling out leaders who are lying that makes them lose all their credibility at the end of the day, right? There are already existing laws to punish powerful people who lie and caused harm towards minorities. All of these things already exist, right? But also, facts and statistics are there, which probably means that it cannot say that if someone believes that lies to you that smoking is bad, you just normally think that it's good, right? Because all of these things are scientifically proven. We don't see why they're trying to run this in their cases extremely soft, right? The fourth thing we tell you about is like how you can stay silent. But notice how since the only option you have is to tell the truth on their side, if you're silent, it probably means that you're going to be suspicious, right? There's only two options. Then it's that you lie. It means that your identity gets exposed. But secondly, even if you stay silent, it's not going to work because it becomes suspicious as people are just going to crack down on you, right? Two arguments then in my speech. Firstly, why lying is inherently justified as it is a principle to self-defense. Secondly, how is lying an important mechanism for minorities? First argument, why it's inherently unjustified. I think the first layer to this is why self-autonomy is an important mechanism to self-defense, right? Firstly, we need there's an overarching principle to self-preserve. Sorry, I will not take another one. There is an inherent right for people to prevent unnecessary and uncharitable outcomes and to make yourself look better, right? This is like white lies, where you protect another individual's feelings because you cherish and appreciate them, right? When you don't disclose the harsh reality in life and society to the people you love, right? This looks like not telling a person whose family member just died immediately right after that, right? You want to temporarily prevent them from accessing those information. You want to wait for them to grow older, right? When you have the mental capacity to accept this fact, right? But second, this looks like lies to protect your privacy. This looks like when a random dude just comes up and asks for your phone number, you should be able to give them a fake number or to lie about not having a phone or etc. This is inherently important because one's privacy deserves to be respected. You need to prevent yourself from getting groomed and being preyed upon under both sides of the houses, right? This looks like also lying about your address to prevent stalkers that literally harms your individual safety under both sides of the house, right? But the second layer to this then is that given that people already consent to the consequences of lying, this looks like losing a friend because you lied to them, or as a politician, losing votes because you lied, and once it gets exposed, most people are rational enough to evaluate these choices, and they should be able to make this decision if they believe that it's one that inherently benefits them and one that's in charge of their life decisions as a whole, right? Second argument then, how is lying an important mechanism for minorities? When you're in the status quo, minorities are already being heard because of who they are. You need to directly lie to protect themselves. This is problematic in two ways. Firstly, for minorities, right? We can have minorities holding information from authorities about revolution, about protests to fight for the better good. If people just cannot lie, they just pour out all of the information, it results in minorities being harder to lobby for change at the end of the day, and it's harder for them to achieve any form of legislative change, but also it's harder for them to access rights, right? Because they can easily find out about your plans by just asking your members about it, and after disclosing the information, it results in the failure of the protest, right? Which probably means it's going to result in more state crackdowns as a whole, right? But second, in terms of LGBTQ communities, because in conservative society, they believe that your identity is unnatural, right? They oppose to who you are, you're unable to feel safe because you'll be stoned to death, but also like self-preservation is really important, right? This looks like in countries like Saudi Arabia, where you literally have the death penalty for those who are in the LGBTQ community. So this means if you don't lie, what is the consequences then is that firstly, your loved ones and your friends turned against you, right? You lose your support structure. You're alienated by the people around you, your colleagues, your friends, your classmates, but you also lose jobs because no one wants to hire someone gay in these places. you have no outcome, you have a worse off life at the end of the day, right? This means that lying about their sexuality is oftentimes the only way people can access some form of like self-protection and some form of privacy to have a better life. We have this principle to secure their better life still exists at the very end of the day, right? Third layer then is how does lying help on the comparative? We know this happens on two fronts. First, when you have the ability to conceal important information, like hiding spots for social movements, information about the time for coups to occur or for protests to happen altogether, these are essential information that necessitates the progress of the social movement as a whole, right? But secondly, when you have the ability to conceal your identity, you don't allow others to discover your identity as a minority community or a member of the LGBTQ community, right? There are boundaries in which that should be respected, right? This means that if you're uncomfortable with opening up to someone, you should never be forced to do so because this is something that's inherently toxic, right? And even in society today, people still don't force you to open up if you're uncomfortable with it. So this means that this happens exclusively symmetrically under all of the house, right? The weighing mechanism then is that the most important piece of material in the round is these people, these individuals who are born as a minority, born to a minority identity based on the lottery above, they're the most vulnerable actor today. And the majority of people do face all of these problems, and therefore we tell lying is a legitimate action in which one deserves how to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for this speech. In order to continue the case for side proposition, I'd like to invite the second prop speaker here.
Okay, can I just confirm that I can be heard and seen?
Yes, you can.
Great, thank you. Hold on, just let me get my timer ready, sorry. All right. Verbal POIs, please, because I probably won't be looking at chat that often. Okay. Time will start in 3, 2, 1. Judge, if you really listen to opposition's case, the biggest impact that they have is that a few of your friends leave you. Rather, on our side, you basically legitimize things such as political coercion, such as scamming people out of their money and out of their own health, such as being able to tell your population to oppress another huge population just because of the fact that you believe something and you want other people to support you in the first place. Note that on their side, they're not able to change any of the problems that are happening in the status quo today, while we're able to alleviate the root problem, which is basically this misinformation that comes out that incentivizes and basically radicalizes populations to commit drastic actions. On our side, realize that once you have a world without lying, all the issues on side opposition that they try to bring up actually do get solved, and rather on their side, they only have a worsening world under the status quo where we already see political misinformation, we already see coercion, we already see scamming, we already see a principal harm against most individuals' dignity. 4 things in my speech. 1, on the principle itself. On their side, they have the principle of self-defense. On our side, you have the principle of dignity. Second of all, on politicians and accountability, why we do this so much better. Third, on the economy point, which is something that the opponents barely responded to at all, which we think is an incredibly important point under status quo. Fourthly, on the extension on how we improve the well-being of most people in our population, especially children. 1, on the principle itself. Realize that their side basically supports the principle which they themselves said is, it's basically a principle of self-defense. They basically have 2 layers under this. They first tell you that, you want to be able to tell white lies to improve the feelings of a lot of your friends in the first place. Look, 3 things here. 1, realize that you can still omit information in the first place. It's not necessary that you must be able to comment on someone's hair. Second of all, just compare the impact here. Realize that under their side, under the extent to this impact, which they say is the most important principle, realize that for these individuals, the worst impact that's going to happen is that you momentarily hurt someone else's feelings. On our side, realize that we solve issues such as political coercion, such as restricting individuals from making a core choice as a whole. Note that on our side, 1, we're talking about more vulnerable actors here. These individuals don't have a choice to be able to make in regards to seeing the truth or not. Second, these individuals are more likely coerced and more likely going to hurt more when the truth comes out for these individuals, because these are the people who are the most vulnerable and relied on other people and trusted other people to help them.
Therefore, if you just consider the actors, we have a much stronger principle because of the simple fact that we support the individuals who are the most coerced. On their side, for a lot of these individuals, people can very easily see through white lies. People typically don't care about them. That is the reason why they speak white lies in the first place. Third, realize that on our side, because people don't have this underlying feeling that, well, someone else might be lying to me, you're more likely going to more effectively communicate with other people. You're more likely going to trust other people because of the simple fact that you aren't able to lie. This is already mechanized inside the model. So on our side, you get more effective communication, you get less of these sort of disputes over these issues. I think we already solved this problem indefinitely. The second layer is an argument about minorities. They tell you inside certain contexts in the status quo today, lying is completely justified because you'll be able to protect yourself. Two things here. One, we don't see the link between lying and protecting yourself. We already told you on our side, omitting information and not telling about your sort of sexuality obviously is another solution that you're able to do in the first place. We already told you that in our model. Second of all, realize that on their side, even if you were able to lie, some sort of because of the fact that governments already have the incentive to try to pursue individuals who are of these sorts of things in the first place, realize that therefore you create much more misinformation. The people inside a lot of these countries oftentimes don't buy into government narratives, and it's only because governments are able to radicalize populations, only because governments are able to utilize misinformation, using them to call out these individuals. That is why they get violence on their side. Rather on our side, once governments are more accountable, they're unable to do all these things like misinformation campaigns. Second, people are more likely going to call them out and are actually going to hold the government more accountable on our side because they're unable to lie about the atrocities they have committed in the past. So therefore, if you want to protect minorities on our side, one, you get a more accountable government. Second, people don't buy into radicalized misinformation, which is the core reason as to why people discriminate against certain minorities in the first place. Therefore, if you want to protect these individuals, that's the principle that they themselves tell you, support our side because we already give you a world that's much safer for these individuals. Second thing, on politicians and accountability. Look, their response is essentially well, these individuals this is not based on the burden of lying. They can still be able to it's not based entirely on the burden of lying. We really frame to you that the core reason why politicians are able to get away with so many things and are able to radicalize populations is core because of the fact that they're able to lie, because they have the ability to lie extremely well, because of the fact that they're unable to take accountability from most politicians. And second, they tell you that, we could call out a lot of these individuals. We already have mechanisms to call out all these people. No, realizing the status quo today, even though Trump was already exposed for basically lying about a bunch of information of immigrants, his voter base is still rapidly growing because of his radical messages, because of the fact that people still want to support him. On our side, once you have these individuals who are not able to lie anymore, you're actually able to get some sort of actual change on our side, simply because of the fact that these individuals can't lie. You're not going to be able to coerce more information, more populations to go against certain races, certain minorities, because you're unable to radicalize them based on a mechanism that we've already set. So therefore, on our side, when we're talking about politicians and accountability, one, we have more accountable politicians. Second, we're unlikely going to be covering up things like corruption. When we're more likely going to be able to go through with the investigations, and investigations go a lot quicker. Third, because of the fact that now there's no sense of distrust, people can more effectively communicate with the governments that is much more transparent. So you actually get some sort of structural change on our side with a lot of issues that people want to tell the government as a whole. So therefore, on our side, you get better politicians rather than the status quo today, where individuals utilize rhetoric, utilize radicalization to boost their own voter base. Third, on the economy point, they basically told you one response. They said that, well, scientific papers exist. You don't need to be like all these companies are already dying out because of these scientific papers. Look, three responses right off the bat. First of all, no. ExxonMobil actively funded things like misinformation campaigns to protect their own interests of seeming like a good company, and it worked because their profits didn't dip. Second of all, realize that for a lot of these companies, it is because of the fact that they have so much money that they have a competing narrative against scientific papers. People want to be able to digest advertisements because they're relatively easy to digest versus an entire scientific article. So for most of these individuals, you're not going to get the same effect with these people. Third, all they just say like, well, you can still omit information. It is illegal to omit information in accordance to laws. On their side, you're going to lie about this information. On our side, even if you are able to omit some things, it is illegal to omit everything. You get more protection on our side, you get more company accountability on our side when people are called out for things like causing addiction, like causing health risks. Lastly, on the extension of the well-being of individuals. Realize that under society, lying basically gives a benefit for a lot of these children. This is simply enough because one, children are able to get away with lies because of sympathy. Second of all, children are more likely going to lie because it is an easy way out of problems that they don't want to deal with. Note that therefore, inside current society, individuals who are capable of lying are able to get away with it and therefore see a benefit to it. They're not going to see the moral harm or the actual practical harm because of the fact that they want to prioritize things like short-term benefits. So for these individuals, when they're able to do things like deal drugs, when they're able to get away from class and education in the first place, they're still able to do this under status quo. On our side, you have no ability to do this. Therefore, we solve a lot of problems pertaining to children under our side. Therefore, we're so proud to propose because we help the vulnerable, we help the principal, and we help the people who matter the most. We are so proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to continue the case for side opposition, I'd like to invite the second opposite speaker here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'll take POIs verbally. So if you have any POIs, kindly mute yourself and directly ask. All right, speech starting in 3, 2, 1. Couple of questions to raise in the speech. First, which world is generally better off and all the mechanisms which they want to talk about. Second of all, on which side of the house do you better protect minorities. And third of all, on the weighing on principles. First of all, on which world is generally better off. I want to start by contending with the vast majority of the claims coming from your side. The first thing they say is that, right now you have a better political arena and a better political sphere because politicians lose the ability to lie. The first thing they say is that, autocratic states right now don't have the capacity to want to promote certain ideologies by factually lying to the people. First of all, I just want to point out that a vast majority of authoritarian states or autocratic nations oftentimes operate under certain ideologies that they're indoctrinated with in of itself. There are examples on how Putin is able to introduce an entire intervention to Ukraine because he was lying to individuals, but also there are examples on how Hitler lied to the people, therefore caused mass amounts of killing on Jews, all falls on the premise that they are they're purposely lying. But we suggest that it's in fact not true because Putin believed that Ukraine is a part of Russia. It was something that was geographically and indoctrinated into the beliefs of these individuals. It was the communities that raised him that told him all these things. It is an ideological thing to which even if you do not believe, even if they don't lie, it's something that they believe in and of itself. So therefore, you probably believe that it's not lying. It is the intervention. So that is why the intervention probably still happens on their side. But in the example of Hitler whatsoever, the fact is that Hitler believed that the Jews were sinners and should burn into hell. So even if it was lying as per the proposition claim, that's something that are best. Even if that is true, realize you still have military commands and whatsoever, to which those soldiers necessarily don't have the capacity to supersede. They were not programmed and they were not in a position of power to question whatever the authorities and whatever Hitler tells them. So even if Hitler was lying, they still have to obey the claims on their side of the house anyways. So Hitler's and whatever the war crimes we're talking about still happens symmetrically on either side. But what does this mean? This means the entirety of the PM speech literally has no comparative delta. This argument exists symmetrically on either side. Don't hack or take you later. But second, I just want to point out call-outs exist in response to this entire political sphere and how politicians cannot lie. First of all, the reason is why call-out exists is for two structural reasons. First, I just want to know there's political incentives for it to do so. The political sphere, for example, politicians would like to call each other out. This is like, for example, in the Conservative Party, if you factually lied about something, the Democratic Party is highly and massively incentivized to call out because of that, because number one, of competing incentives, but two, realize you want to factor in each other as a result of it. Or it is the reason foundationally for it is because you call individuals out for certain things that offers you more actual for these things to occur. So the factor is that political accountability exists on either side of house. Even if you believe on their side of house, they're able to lie. You're unable to lie. The second, I just want to know that media incentives always exist. You have things that, for example, in investigative journalism and media coverage that systematically just want to call out these politicians. The reason for it is a couple of fold. First, the factor is that if you call it a politician that is lying, you gain more traction. Therefore, you're able to get more revenue as a media corporation, as a media company. But two, generally, it's just exposing politicians that are lying and therefore factually proving it means to say that on their side of house, on our side of house, you actually get more traction in the brain, so the incentives exist. But the third response to this entire claim on political sphere and why you cannot lie, it's just to say it's just to point out that individuals in of itself have some level of rational calculus to evaluate it. Things that, for example, the society constantly progresses, information become more accessible and become more widespread. That is why individuals are still equipped with some fundamental apparatuses to literally evaluate things. But lastly, even at their best, let's put this claim, because we think in of itself, even if you're able to lie, it is a good thing. argument because you're able to have things, for example, more nuanced policies and more discussions as a collective artist, where it's an encompass or it's an incorporation of vast different beliefs on the ground. We think it is better. So even the absolute best case of the argument, we take them. The second claim they had under this particular juncture was that, oh, businesses cannot lie. Businesses can lie, and therefore you prevent people from turning away from bad beliefs. Their example here was that people smoke because corporations lie. That is untrue, because let's look at the status quo. People are already exposed to tons and factual information with regards to how smoking in and of itself is bad and how it causes lung cancer. Why is this true? Look at, for example, you have printed lung cancer pictures on cigarette boxes. You have the printing of the words that smoking harms your health on cigarette boxes as well. So the fact here is that on both sides of the house, even if, so what it shows is that information is already being given to information, but also realize that if you search online, there's a multitude of information regarding why smoking in of itself is bad. This shows that even if people have access to information, they still chose to opt into smoking and bad habits. So it's not a matter of a lie anyways. But I think this is also parallel things that, for example, individuals want to eat junk food and stuff, or that, for example, they're diagnosed with things like obesity or whatsoever. It is not a problem of a lying of itself, because individuals derive a lot of gratification from these forms of actions which they're able to do so. So the point here is that addiction is out of question, because drugs are illegal in most states of the world anyways. There's a million whatsoever to mitigate this. The second thing they have is here, you have competing incentives to outweigh scientific information. This actually is untrue, because it is unclear why you're likely to perceive into information or a publication of, like, I don't know, macro research from Coca-Cola when apparently you have more, prestigious government facilitated facilities to really regulate these forms of information. So that falls as well. The conclusion to this issue is that the entirety of the proposition is uncomparative. They cannot win the rock. The second issue, therefore, on which side of the house do you better protect minorities, which I think is very important. We told you how minorities are able to conceal the information better. This is important because it allows them to literally conceal their identity from being able and prevents them from being able to crack down. Your response was here, oh, but the ability to lie is because of emotional rhetoric, and it literally is contingent upon that. Number one, I would argue people have preconceived biases, that people are indoctrinated with stigmatization whatsoever. Clearly, things that, for example, it is stated in the Islam that homophobia in of itself is prohibited. So even if people do not lie on their side of house, their beliefs do not change. And realize beliefs are connotated not on the basis of facts either. So clearly, it is what people believed in on their side of house, like things that, for example, white supremacists in the United States. So the point is, what is the impact of this argument, therefore? Is that a mitigation coming from their side of house is not stand, because the ability for it to lie because of emotional rhetoric is factually untrue. But what is the importance of the argument, therefore? First of all, we told you on how minorities are being the most vulnerable. This is important because it is only on our side of house we're able to conceal information and protect yourself from being cracked down. The second of all, realize you cannot do this on their side of house. Their response from third might be, you're able to remain silent. But it's untrue, because on their side of house, it is either you remain silent or you speak the truth. If you choose to remain silent, that in of itself is suspicious, and individuals speculate more on you. So on their side of house, in conservative nations, for example, you are more likely to identify who is LGBTQ and who is literally the minorities and collective. So the point here is that you allow for more crackdowns and more propensity for these things to occur on their side of house, the moment to which you preferable to which individuals cannot lie as a totality. So let's weigh up like basically the principle right now. The principle, I just want to note that the principle to self-defense on their side, the principle of choice on their side of house is entirely contingent upon proving why in itself individuals cannot break through these forms of fake news. We give you a host of mechanisms as well. You have things like call outs, you have things like information that's regulated, you have things like factual research whatsoever is conducted, so that principles mitigate it to a very large extent. But why do we think that a principle to self-defense right here is far more important, even if you buy the choice on their side of house? First of all, just want to note, the principle to self-defense in of itself is an extension of your bodily autonomy. Things that, for example, this is parallel things that, for example, privacy rights. These is power to things that, for example, generally your ability to protect yourself. But second, I actually want to know that the ability for you to protect yourself in itself, the principle of self-defense, is also an extension of your ability to choose. I.e., if you're unable to protect yourself on your side of house, and if you're harmed, that also harms your ability to consent into choices whatsoever. That is why the wing in our side of house clearly is superior on all these grounds. We have to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to continue the case for side proposition, I invite the thought proposition speaker here.
Can I be heard and seen?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
All right. That's the case. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. the way up that I want to do at the start of this speech is really to just ask you guys, do you think it's more probable that an individual will lie to protect themselves, or an entire government, entire hierarchy will use the lie as a mechanism for that regime? If you answer that question, we're going to win this debate easily. 3 questions and clashes I want to do. First, about human dignity. Second, about governments and politicians. Third, about ads and businesses, which was unresponded to. First, human dignity. The premise we gave you here is that humans ought to have the means to choose the pursuit of happiness. The rebuttal we get down their bench is just that people protect themselves. For example, they can lie about their own phone number, and that's something that you can choose to do because it makes you happier. 3 reasons why this is in and of itself wrong. The first is that we can still like omit information on our side of the house. You aren't harming anyone by omitting information. You're just keeping that information to yourself. Op needs to tell us why lying in and of itself and harming someone else is necessary for you to be happy. But secondly, right, like in this scenario where you do lie about your phone number, think about the person that's asking you for the phone number, right? They might think that, oh, okay, it's fine that they just don't have their phone number. Well, in reality, there might be actually something wrong with them that you're not telling about them. This harms this person because it means that they go on with their life not knowing about what happened and why that happened, which means that this problem is never resolved for them. But lastly, and I think the most important is where we draw a parallel to things like legal deals. In legal deals, it is stipulated that you need to know everything about the company before you go into that decision. For the same reason, we think it is vastly more important. You have the means to know more things about your daily life rather than just to lie about things to protect yourself. For example, I would value the fact that I know more about my school so I can go into the school rather than me just concealing information about lying about myself to make sure that the school doesn't know more about me. Just off of this clash, we're going to say that we take the principle because we think that the only way that you're going to get better happiness and better pursuit of happiness is when you know what's actually going on inside of your life. You know what options you have and you can choose those options. Here, Op needs to tell us why lying to protect yourself is necessary and can harm other people and why that's principally justified on their side of the house because there are obvious harms in lying to people. Second clash, why we help governments and politicians. 2 parts to this. I want to first talk about the possibility of using lying as a weapon, and secondly, about using lying to protect yourself. First, as a weapon then, opposition gives us 2 responses. The first was that politicians believe their own lies, therefore they're still going to spread the things on our side, and secondly, that politicians are punished for lying. Let's look at the first laughable rebuttal, right? It ignores all of our nuance for 2 reasons. The first was that, look, lying means that we don't have lies from the dawn of time. This means that there wouldn't be this wrongful perception of, for example, Jews and Hitler's perception of Jews in the first place. Because this motion, like we said from first and carried down the bench, is going to start from the very start of the world. There won't be perceptions and preconceived doctrines of Jews being inherently worse in that specific religion because of the fact that you can't lie about that, because that's factually untrue and that's insulting to their dignity. Therefore, we think it's much less likely that Hitler would have believed his own lie on our side of the house. And the fact that there's a possibility means we could have prevented the Holocaust. Often needs to engage with that. But secondly, the majority in the cases have politicians who know about their own lies, okay? Like, not all of these politicians aren't just like very good and truthful men, all right? Politicians know about their own lies in examples like when they're most widespread. Look how Trump supported candidates have a higher likelihood of getting elected in the electoral system. So as a candidate, you have an incentive to say that Trump that the election was stolen from Trump in an unlawful manner because that's more likely to get you elected. But you don't actually believe in that lie. You're just doing it for your own good. This in and of itself right here is one, principally unjustified because it hurts everybody else. But secondly, it means that this can be absolutely prevented on our side of the house because politicians know they're lying, which means on our side they won't be able to continue spreading this misinformation. An example here that we think is particularly pertinent in the world today is, for example, how top generals in Russia know that it is wrong to invade Ukraine. A lot of top generals are giving feedback to Putin, but yet they're still scared of Putin on their side of the house, which means they continue to lie to the public. On our side, they don't have the capacity to lie. So when Putin asks them, like, do you actually support this campaign? They're going to say no. Even if they get killed, that means we prevent the invasion of Ukraine on our side of the house. This means right here that it is very probable on our side that we are going to prevent the most heinous, the most pernicious types of lies on our side of the house. Second part on why lying to protect yourself isn't actually very beneficial. The premise here is that Op says minorities use lies to protect themselves, right? They say that minorities conceal information like how you're an LGBTQ in a conservative country. Two responses here. The first that we gave you down the bench was that you can still remain silent. We don't get why lying in of itself is going to protect an individual more than just staying silent if they choose to. I can choose to conceal my information to myself, not talk about my gender at all during like family dinners if that means I want to do so, right? On their side, they have a capacity to lie, which means that they're going to harm others in the long run. But secondly, I would actually flip this argument completely. If all the minorities in the world right now all banded together and agreed that they're all part of the queer movement, we think the queer movement would all of a sudden gain so much power on the international stage. If you saw pride parades going through the streets of things like of countries like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, that's when you get international attention, because people are actually telling themselves and the government of what is true. The way up here is very simple. For terms of for lying to protect yourselves, that's the benefits of that are mitigatory. In fact, we would say that actually exposing your true identity is beneficial in a lot of cases. But the worst harm that Op doesn't respond to is how the government uses lying as a weapon to create nationalism, propaganda, oppression, and manipulation of the minority. We're going to move on to the last clash on why ads and businesses are so important in today's debate. The only rebuttal we get here is same to the politicians one. Oh, politicians are punished for lying, and so are companies. This debate does not exist in the United States of America, okay? There are developing countries in the world that do not have the mechanisms that are necessary to prevent companies from lying. There are scammers that exist around the world that lie to old people. You scam them of all their money they earned their entire lives. You scam them of their family incomes. You scam them about their health. You do a random organ transplant on them just to make more money and kill them and harm their fundamental human dignity. The impact here is very, very clear. This is the most widespread harm. It's the most pertinent. It's this thing that it's going to be the most frequent, because ads and companies always have the short-term incentive to promote these lies to get more money. Scammers have these incentives. This means on our side we're able to prevent all of these pernicious harms and more, including the government. We're very proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for this speech. In order to complete the substantive portion of case for side opposition, I'd like to invite the third opposition speaker here.
Hi, just checking if I'm audible and visible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, let's have my timer. Again, I prefer POIs to be verbally. I'll try to take you after 5. Please do not badger before. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. If you believe something to be true, even if the societal consensus points to the opposite, is it considered lying, right? But we know that gay people are normal. They should not be ostracized from society. But if a leader of a conservative nation believes them to be abominations of nature and directly spreads his propaganda, this is not a lie, because the leader believes this information to be true and is part of their identity in believing that these people are directly abominations against God, right? It's a key one-side proposition never contends with. They've already lost this debate because so many of our narratives directly takes out many of their claims. A few questions in this debate. Firstly, on the principle, right? They tell you that companies lie to you, therefore you can't make any informed decisions, right? It's the entire crux of their principle. Notice that given the influx of information that exists in the status quo, for example, if you have a post about COVID or vaccines, Instagram or Twitter, for example, will automatically add a link to a post that directly directs you to the WHO website or resources that will educate you on vaccine, that will educate you on COVID-19 that are actually accurate, right? So therefore, notice that this misinformation doesn't exist on outside, given that you already have so many mechanisms to educate people. But secondly, they also tell that people don't want to read scientific paper. We believe that's true, but notice that there are already multiple mechanisms that exist to dumb down to make the information more accessible.
Why?
For example, infographics. I'll tell you later at 5. For example, infographics that you see on Instagram on the daily explain why smoking is just an incredibly bad thing. That kind of for just simple words, so people just understand this, really mitigate this. But second of all, given the entire principle, it just hinges on the fact that they want people to have a free choice to make a good informed decision. We tell you that notice in their world, you directly cannot make this decision in the first place. Because notice they prove analysis to you that why this is true, they already cannot cop this principle and this false, right? Notice that there's a slew of reasons why your choice is directly affected by many arbitrary factors. Firstly, even by the media narrative that oftentimes bias, for example, the left-wing or right-wing extremes. Second of all, you're influenced by your family and by your friends and communities. They're really echo chambers for you. Even that influenced by all these decisions on your side of the house, you aren't able to make a free informed decision, given that you're already within these echo chambers, given this, right? Given that all these things that really shape and influence your decision anyway, the principle falls. This entire principle is not contingent upon lie, but simply upon this free decision, which we already take down from the very get-go. Second thing I'm going to give in this debate is on politics, right? A few observations before moving on to this. First, that proposition wants to give you a model where they tell you that people can choose to stay silent if they want to. Given that they have this notice on their side, if the leaders want to stay silent and hide any important information, they can on their side. Their impacts already washed out, right? What they then need to deal with was the likelihood incentives of political leaders to expose the truth when they could so easily stay silent on their side. It's incredibly untrue because notice that given they're already conceived in the analysis, leaders are going to hide information. The only way to expose them is through the mechanism they propose to you. Therefore, if you're given an option to stay silent, they will probably choose this. It's directly no different from the status quo. There's no doubt that they already lose out on this analysis. But second of all, notice how Bernice tells you that sometimes leaders directly spread propaganda because they believe it to be true. For example, Trump claiming dumb things and antagonizing people opposing him is because he believes this information, for example, to be true. We believe the COVID situation in US, for example, is okay, even though the data showed it's sucks. Therefore, given this also active side proposition, he cannot co-opt their benefits, right? But the third observation I want to make, they want to give you an example on Russian officials and how they oppose Putin's ideologies on their side, this like to manifest. What they tell you, right? The third speaker tells you if they oppose Putin, they're going to be killed. Notice how even you oppose and kill anyway, they aren't able to co-opt any benefits because even you can't overturn Putin's decision. Even Putin's ideology is directly that Ukraine should be Russia's state. Therefore, war is still going to happen. They're unable to co-opt any of the benefits they tell us. There's still going to be war crimes against the people on the ground. The second layer to this is on the mitigations. Notice that Wayne and Bernice have told you multiple times again, there's absolutely no response to this, right? How is outside better able to hold them accountable? For example, cancel culture or calling out leaders who are lying, because notice that the political sphere is so polarized, we have directly competing parties fact-checking, I'll tell you later, don't badger, fact-checking each other and trying to call them out is within their incentive, given that they want to is the opposite parties, right? Therefore, when the lie is exposed, this means that people on the ground, the voter base, are more aware and they want more transparency. What happens to this on outside? There's more scrutiny because the people they elect because they just want this transparency, and there are already existing laws to punish powerful people who lie and cause harm, right? Example, perjury, where Bill Clinton impeached simply because he lied to the judiciary. We believe that this exists on our side as well. But before I move on to Wayne, I'll take a POI.
Your entire rebuttal to our government manipulation argument is that politicians believe their own lies. If people could not have lied from the dawn of time, why would they believe their own lie in the first place?
Okay.
And many politicians also lie and they don't lies.
Here's the thing. Even, let's do some weighing here then. Even if in the worst case, we buy that some politicians will get away with lying in your world, why then is our case still more important and directly outweighs whatever side proposition tells you? Because notice that protecting minorities is the most important thing in this debate. That really moves me on to the last part of my speech. Right? Notice firstly, they never properly respond to this entire minority argument that Wayne and Bernice spend so much time talking about. It's the most important analysis in this debate. Because given that they're so vulnerable, you already told you that mechanisms to call out politicians already exist to a certain extent. It's already dilutes the harms that they tell you, given there are a lot of ways to mitigate politicians misrepresenting the truth, right? But because notice that minorities are directly vulnerable, they have no other means to protect themselves. Notice during this debate, the only way for these minorities to protect themselves and through self-protection is through lying. Why is this so, right? Firstly, the state just doesn't care about them anyway. Second of all, given the minorities, there are very little resources and support structures. Therefore, the only way that they can protect themselves, the only way they can achieve any of the benefit, any societal utility, is through lying to protect their own identity, right? Therefore, what happens with this? It's like proposition is to engage with this, to explain why they'll trade this off. Trade this only means of protection of the most vulnerable people on the ground. The only response is, oh, they can stay silent, but notice what happens because people on their side cannot lie. If they say something directly means they're going to look suspicious, people are still going to call them out anyway, the mechanisms just do not work. But second of all, they don't want to tell you that they want to force people out of the closet because it's quote unquote beneficial. It's also a proposition to notice that people in conservative nations, they really get stoned the second they employ identity. Everyone in these nations opposing who you are as a person, right? What happens to this then get stoned? They're going to be alienated by their companions, their family. They lose all the support structures, but they also lose their jobs because their employers clearly don't want to hire someone gay in their community. What happens to this? Because they can't lie. They lose all the support structure. All these minorities are going to get harmed. Therefore, even in the very worst case, where some politicians lie, we think we'll trade off all this kind of work case in the worst case, because these minorities are still the most vulnerable thing in this debate. Side proposition needs to engage with this in order for them to. Then moving on, what they say, they want to say that you already told you they want to say that you can say silent. It's entirely untrue anyway, because if you choose to say silent and not say that you're straight, for example, it's already suspicious and already show that you're probably gay, so you can identify that anyway. What happens is this: it's only on the outside that people are best protected. You can conceal your information and not get cracked down. But not only are like gay people that are outside, just like minorities, for example, when they protest, they want to protest against these oppressive structures without have like within these like groups itself, but they want to protest. Only on outside we're able to protect them, because if a police goes up to them, ask them about this, if they're forced to tell the truth, this directly means all the private information within these are going to get leaked out. The police are better able to crack down on you and directly take out your protest. You're able to achieve all the societal change that you would have gotten if you had the opportunity to protest, if all your information were to remain private. That's what happens on outside. We're better able to protect minorities. Second of all, I think that principle already false given is incredibly non-exclusive. But thirdly, I think the argument of politicians also washes out, given we already explained to you how there's so many call-out mechanisms. Anyway, therefore very, very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to summarize the case for side opposition, I'd like to invite the op reply here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Let me set up my timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think when government actually tries to push you only some examples today, it looks like the Russian and Ukraine war, and give you like very niche examples and tries to downplay all of the types of examples or visualization of the outcomes that we give today, is the reason why it costed them the debate, right? A few layers of color. Firstly, I think that the government just refused to engage with the fact that if you generally believe that something is true, no matter how factually wrong the thing you say is, it's still not considered as a lie under both sides of the house, right? This looks like if I'm a Christian and I tell people that God exists, it is not considered a lie under both sides of the houses, right? But secondly, there's a huge problem with the straw manning of examples, right? It's not as simple as losing a friend or commenting on their hairstyle. You can't downplay all of the harms that we try to push you, right? It's about emotional trauma, about issues like family issues, trust issues, and deaths. But it also looks like a potential stalker that's literally stalking every single thing you do online, or stalking every single thing you're doing at home, whether you're showering, what you're doing, what time are you going to school. All of these things, when you ask for your number or ask for your address at the very end of the day, right? We have two questions then. Firstly, whether accountability actually exists and whether it's important. This is the biggest push coming from government today. If we take down the whole issue on accountability, we win this debate, right? There's three layers that they tell you to this. Firstly, in terms of politicians, they tell you that lying fuels rhetorics and radicalizes people on the ground, right? Three responses across the bench. We firstly tell that call-out culture and cancel culture literally exists, right? Look at how Najib and his wife was held accountable and was like jailed because of corruption and because of how people are so mad at them for all of these things that even if they wanted to get out of it, they couldn't, right? Because call-out culture exists in majority of people already know, right? But secondly, we tell that awareness campaign literally exists, but there is scrutiny towards politicians and things like misinformation anyway. This looks like the West media calling out companies that uses Xinjiang cotton because of the exploitation behind it, right? The third response we tell you that is that political opponents and technocrats that exist where they have an incentive to call you out for all of these things, right? The second thing then they did was that the example they capitalized the most out of was Russia and Ukraine war. We thought it's inherently washed in both our second and third speeches. They just refused to engage with this and concede to the fact that this is not a valid example, right? We question the legitimacy of their examples for two reasons. Firstly, given that most of the people on the ground in Russia that have basic access to social media already acknowledge this atrocity, when you literally have Russian media reporters protesting on national TV, right? This just proves that even if you reveal the truth, you still don't stop an autocratic government. We don't see why this push under the side of the house actually materializes, right? But second, in terms of the fake news and fake information, right? They tell it as a widespread harm because companies have an incentive to do so. Most things to this, we know for cigarettes, they're legally required to print pictures of lung cancer and health hazards, right? If they don't do this, this probably means that they'll get jailed or fined in all ways, right? But secondly, about drugs, there's generally campaigns that exist. It's literally written in the textbook on why this is harmful and why you should prevent yourself from ever getting into drugs in the very first place, right? But the third thing that we tell you is that our existing system to fact check, like on Instagram, where banners just pop out that includes a link to accurate information on COVID-19 or elections. Right? The third thing that I want to tell you is about scams. We've had this literally happen when you see news on TV that this scam happened. You should prevent these things, right? We tell that there are already existing structures to actively prevent all of this. We don't see why this is the biggest push coming from the ASDC house, right? We then move on to the next question. Which side better protects minorities? Their response on how minorities can lie in of itself does not stand, right? Because if you choose to remain silent where you're questioned about your sexuality, you're admitting that you're gay anyways, right? Because people get suspicious. So it even means that if you stay silent, people will still suspect that you're gay, but secondly, you don't provoke the fact that, or the assumption that you're from an LGBTQ community anyways, which probably means that all of the harms we told you about people actively disassociating from you, people alienating you, still happens under their subby house, right? We don't see why they better protect minorities. That firstly, now they cannot stop autocratic governments from doing what they want, like we've already proven to you. But second, this literally already exists even if you stay silent, proud to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to summarize the case for side government and to conclude this debate, I'd like to invite the prompt reply here.
Cool. So to summarize this debate, my time starts in 3, 2, 1. At the end of this debate, even if all of ops harm exists and all hell breaks loose and you lose all your friends and you lose your job and you lose your voters, you still principally ought to not rob people of their own moral compass. You cannot take away the difference between what defines a human and what defines a door, because humans make choices, doors cannot. Op takes away choice and dignity because they allow the parasite of a lie to infiltrate your own weighing metric. This ought to be the priority of this debate, because if people cannot decide for themselves what good is dignity. The principled argument of self-defense was flawed on 4 different levels that we pointed out. First, you can already omit like things, like that's just generally true, like they can't just cherry pick one example of like sexuality. But secondly, let's talk about the likelihood, right? Like, what's the likelihood of a white lie existing compared to a governmental lie? We say that governments are far more likely going to utilize and weaponize these lies because lies are more easily to be targeted and there's always an incentive behind a lie. The third thing we said is like the significance of a self-defense argument comes from what you can be defended from. So at best, we flip that. Because stalkers are far worse when they can lie. Governments are far worse than when they can lie. Oppressors are far worse when they could lie. We would far much rather evil actors to not lie, or compared to when good people can lie to protect themselves. But lastly, talk about the scope and the magnitude, right? Like when we're talking about an entire community of people and minorities, it's all of the minorities. It's the people who are being oppressed. It's all of the Jews that are killed during the Holocaust. Just compare the scope and the magnitude we win on this. But the third thing they said was just like Hitler can still lie because he believes in his lie. Like, this is untrue, because why does he believe in his lies? Why does he believe in his lie in the first place? Because it's a society that indoctrinated him to be. But why does a society believe in the lie in the first place? Because someone had to lie in the first place in order for the society to believe it to be, right? Our world is that we're a world where lies never existed from the beginning of time. So therefore, lies don't exist in the first place. Minorities and these people don't believe, and societal narratives are not false in the first place. So therefore, the entire deputy's case is out of this debate. Don't challenge the fiat of the motion. The fourth thing is about ops, like Op basically lives in a naive and fake painting, right? They say, okay, politicians believe the fake information they spread, and that's why they can continue spreading it. Politicians are not stupid and truthful. They're the opposite. They're cunning and liars. They're more likely going to believe in lies. Do you think Trump, having so much money, would believe that his election was actually stolen? Is probably to preserve his own power. Therefore, we say that politicians probably know that it is a lie. But secondly, like basically they say that, oh, they have research paper and they have investigative journalism. That's absolutely not comparative, because we can have it too. It's at best mitigatory. But lastly, we flip the argument on minorities, because when they say, okay, like minorities might be oppressed, like the sexuality thing, and these people, the gay people and LGBTQ people might be oppressed. But the difference on our side is that they were not going to be oppressed from the first place. There's going to be no narrative from the beginning that says that LGBTQ people are worth less. We're saying that basically there's no societal narrative from the get-go for these minorities to be characterized as
far less worthy of respect and of civil rights. So therefore, the minorities argument is out of the debate because we can solve that on our side, given this is a prefers motion. So lastly, I want to talk about what was unresponded, which is about ads and commercialization, because people's lives are shattered under this argument. Money are going to be scammed. Poor people who have saved their entire career to buy a house or to buy a car and that would have massively improved their lifestyle and maybe break the glass ceiling and break out of the poverty cycle would be taken and robbed away of their chance because it says, oh, this is a good investment in a bond or a cryptocurrency, where in actuality their money will be taken away and scammed because of falsehood, because of lies. So therefore, at the end of the debate, we think that simply we're able to mitigate all the arguments. They have yet to respond to the adequate principle we are so proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. This completes the debate for the round. So yeah, you can virtually cross floors, shake hands. This is a silent round.